The day after the verdict, and everyone's still talking about it. I'm Jake Tapper, and this is The Lead. The national lead, they think he got away with murder. Protesters in the streets nationwide calling for a new trial for George Zimmerman. Will the Justice Department meet their demands even after a jury said not guilty? No ankle bracelet, no curfew. George Zimmerman is a free man, but can anyone ever live a normal life again after being tried for such a heinous crime? We'll ask the attorney who defended someone who would know, Casey Anthony. And the pop culture lead, putting her name anywhere near a book guarantees an instant bestseller. So why did J.K. Rowling, the creator of Harry Potter, try to go incognito and release her new novel under a pen name? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jake Tapper. Welcome to The Lead. We'll begin with the national lead. Perhaps not wanting to appear as if they're gloating, George Zimmerman supporters have remained mostly quiet after his not guilty verdict Saturday night. Not so among those who wanted to see him convicted for the shooting death of Trayvon Martin in the trial that brought a renewed focus to issues of race, racial profiling, and self-defense, and captivated the country. In Sanford, Florida, where the shooting happened, the mayor and police chief appeared at a community prayer service today and praised the way the city has handled the aftermath.
Everybody wants to see us go out and act up. This community came together to talk about what its issues are. This community is coming together to talk about where we are today and how we can move forward.
The Justice Department is now considering civil rights charges against Zimmerman as the verdict brings thousands of outraged protesters into the streets. Law enforcement warned people to stay peaceful, and for the most part, they did, as thousands of Americans took to the streets to protest what they consider a miscarriage of justice. Many braved the summer heat in hoodies, showing solidarity with Trayvon Martin. But not everything stayed peaceful. Sunday in Los Angeles, swelling crowds refused police orders to disperse and then, according to police, threw batteries, rocks, and chunks of concrete at police. LAPD officers fired beanbag rounds at the crowds and arrested 7 people. In another part of LA, marches shut down a freeway. On the other side of the country, in New York, protesters took to Times Square, then marched to Harlem, where arrests followed clashes with police. But generally, the clashes were few, even if emotions were still raw.
Perhaps we can take this anger and move it into a positive vein, because if nothing else, this snapped our necks back.
We are going to continue as a people to fight against this madness, this brutality, till it stops.
Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. urged calm.
But there must be carried out with dignity and discipline, and let no act discredit the legacy of Trayvon Martin or the appeal of his family. Because in the long run, we will prevail in the struggle for justice.
You said in your word, let justice roll down like water.
Meanwhile, the NAACP and others are calling on the Justice Department to press federal civil rights charges against Zimmerman.
There cannot be 2 standards in America. One for white people and one for black people. Those days are over.
Experts say that such a prosecution would be extremely difficult to mount with any real chance of success. And at the White House briefing room today, President Obama's spokesman would not touch it.
Will be handled in the way it should be at the Department of Justice, and certainly not here.
Across town today, Attorney General Eric Holder gave a speech at a luncheon for an African-American sorority.
The Justice Department shares your concern. I share your concern.
And he referred to the shooting as unnecessary.
The tragic, unnecessary shooting death of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida last year.
Some Zimmerman supporters expressed disappointment that Holder called the death unnecessary, since that would seem to suggest the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the land may be rejecting the self-defense argument of the acquitted defendant, Mr. Zimmerman. Zimmerman's argument was, after all, that he thought it was, in fact, necessary to shoot Trayvon Martin, and a jury agreed that that was at the very least a possibility. And what about George Zimmerman? Are more charges ahead? NAACP officials tell CNN they have around 800,000 signatures on their online petition asking for the Justice Department to file federal civil rights against Zimmerman. The website was so overloaded with visits, it crashed for a couple hours yesterday. The Justice Department actually opened an investigation on the case over a year ago. Attorney General Eric Holder acknowledged today at that event that the investigation is still ongoing.
I want to assure you that the department will continue to act in a manner that is consistent with the facts and the law. We are committed to standing with the people of Sanford, with the individuals and families affected by this incident, and with our state and local partners in order to alleviate tensions, to address community concerns, and to promote healing.
But how realistic is it that Zimmerman would face federal charges after being acquitted? Well, let's bring in our legal panel. Linda Kenny-Bodden is a criminal defense attorney who represented Phil Spector and was on Casey Anthony's defense team. And Sunny Hostin is a CNN legal analyst and a former federal prosecutor. Sunny, let's start with you. The discussion of these federal charges, they've typically been applied to public employees like police officers in the Rodney King case. Attorney General Holder said last year there's a high bar for these charges. Can you walk us through this high bar? What would be needed? Is this really credible?
It is a high bar. I do, Jake, think that it's a possibility. I think it's credible, and we do know that the Justice Department has a parallel investigation going on into this matter, and they have had for some time, for about a year now, and that investigation, as the Attorney General said, was still ongoing. What they would have to prove is under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Act, the Hate Crime Act, many people call it. It was passed in 2009, and they'd have to prove that George Zimmerman's actions were racially motivated, that he willfully injured Trayvon Martin because of his race, that part of it was because of his race. I don't know. When you look at that, and you know when it's race-based that the federal government does have jurisdiction, I think that it certainly is a possibility. And, you know, although the state did not use race as an element in this case. Remember, the state was precluded from calling it racial profiling. They did call it profiling, that George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin as a criminal. I don't think it's such a leap to argue, well, yes, he profiled him as a criminal because he was African-American, because other African-Americans, in his view, were the ones getting away, were the ones, criminals, the ones that were criminals in his community. And so I don't think that it's a stretch when people are arguing that, you know, it's an impossibility for the Justice Department to bring a case here.
Linda, after the verdict, the prosecutor said that this case was not about race. What do you think is the likelihood of the Justice Department actually filing these charges?
Well, Jake, I've been involved in cases where there is a Justice Department request for an investigation or an investigation, and I think it's highly unlikely. The Justice Department already found in one report that race wasn't the underlying current of this case. So then they're talking about excessive force, which the jury found is not credible here. So I don't think it's going to happen. Usually they take these cases when there is an actual racial component or under the Civil Rights Act when there is excessive force, and usually it has to do with more than one shot. It has to do with a pattern of practice, normally a police community, problems such as we saw in New Jersey with the New Jersey State Police and racial profiling. But a one-shot case from a private citizen that's not a political assassination is going to be very difficult for them to bring under these circumstances.
Let's talk about some of the other legal burdens Zimmerman could be facing. Listen to what his defense attorney said the night of the acquittal.
And on the civil aspect, if someone believes that it's appropriate to sue George Zimmerman, then we will seek and we will get immunity in a civil hearing. And we'll see just how many civil lawsuits are spawned from this fiasco.
Linda, walk us through that. That means something very specific. What did Mark O'Mara mean when he said, we will get immunity?
Well, the Stand Your Ground law in Florida has an immunity component. If a judge found that Stand Your Ground applied, he would get automatic immunity from lawsuits in the civil arena and more criminal prosecution from a state agency. The problem here is that there was no specific judge's finding. Now, there was a jury charge, Jake, that said George Zimmerman has the right to stand his ground. So what O'Mara will be arguing is that he does have immunity because the jury accepted the Stand Your Ground immunity in their not guilty verdict. And that's going to be an issue that's going to be litigatable by both sides, because the question is the jury, which is not reflected in the law, does that count, or does it have to be another judge's hearing?
And Sonny, Zimmerman is also he has also filed a lawsuit against NBC for that misleading editing of that package in which he sounded as if he was bringing up race on his own. He wasn't asked about it. How likely is that suit to be successful?
You know, I'm not sure about that, Jake. I wasn't aware that actually he had filed the suit. I know that Mark O'Mara said that that was something that they were going to do. But, you know, I'm not sure of the result of that. I wonder, though, if Trayvon Martin's family is thinking about filing a wrongful death suit. We do see wrongful death suits and on the civil side, even when there is a not guilty verdict and acquittal on the criminal side. But I think Linda makes a good point. Because stand your ground is this sort of odd law that Florida has, and it's in a couple of other states, he may have that civil immunity. At least his attorneys have indicated that they are going to seek that immunity. And I think that's you know, it's something that people have been talking about all day, all yesterday. Can our family at least get some sort of justice or what they perceive to be justice in the civil arena, which has a lower standard of proof? It's only preponderance of evidence, and I think Florida is not going to afford them that.
That's right. Stand your ground, not invoked in this trial, but might be invoked in the next one.
Yeah.
Sonny Hostin, Linda Kenny Bodden, thank you so much. Coming up, he's a free man, but his own brother says George Zimmerman will be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. We'll ask Casey Anthony's attorney what